Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. President Trump calls Saudi Arabia America's strongest partner and unveils a $142 billion arms deal in Riyadh. He also promises to end all sanctions on Syria, urging a new path towards greatness for the war-torn country. A major trade deal between Washington and Beijing takes effect, cutting most tariffs and halting a damaging trade war. The agreement reached in Geneva talks offers temporary relief to global markets and supply chains. Ukrainian President Zelensky says he'll attend Ukraine-Russia talks only if Putin shows up in person. He challenges the Kremlin, saying Putin is too scared for a face-to-face meeting in Istanbul. President Trump to meet Syria's Islamist-led interim leader after announcing a shock move to lift all US sanctions. The decision faces pushback over Syria's past al-Qaeda links, but Trump insists on a new diplomatic opening. Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney unveils a 29-member cabinet to reset ties with President Trump. Key ministers stay on as Ottawa prepares to redefine its US trade strategy. Gaza rescuers say 29 die in Israeli strikes near a hospital as the Israeli army orders new evacuations in northern Gaza. Islamic Jihad fires rockets into Israel. 2 are intercepted, while the UN warns urgent action is needed to prevent genocide. China and Colombia sign a landmark deal bringing Bogota into Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. President Xi calls for a quality upgrade in ties after meeting Colombian leader Gustavo Petro in Beijing. Former President Jose Mujica, the guerrilla-turned-leader for his humility and radical reforms, has died at age 89. The VW Beetle-driving statesman led Uruguay from 2010 to 2015, winning global respect for his honesty and progressive politics. A major shift in global trade, a new deal between the United States and China, has now come into effect, marking a rare moment of calm in a trade war that's rattled markets and supply chains around the world. The agreement, finalized earlier this week in Geneva, slashes most of the heavy tariffs that have defined years of tensions between the world's two largest economies. President Donald Trump is calling it a very, very strong deal. Speaking to Fox News while en route to the Gulf, he said the most exciting part is China opening up its economy to American businesses. Let's take a listen in to what President Trump had to say about the deal.
One of the things I think that could be most exciting for us and also for China is that we're trying to open up China because, as you know, many years ago we opened up the USA. Now it's time for China to open up, and that's part of our deal.
While details remain scarce, the White House says this deal lays out a clear framework and could be a game changer for US companies seeking access to China's massive market. For now, it's a temporary ceasefire, but one that could have lasting impacts on global trade. We're now joined by Dr. Jayjit Bhattacharya, who's the president of the CDEPR. Thank you very much, Dr. Bhattacharya, for joining us. This trade deal has come into effect, a cut of 115% on each of the country, meaning that the US now pays 10% for imports into China and vice versa at 10%. How significant is this of a deal, given this ongoing trade war, and how long until it trickles down through to the consumer? I believe your audio has gone. Have you unmuted yourself? Brilliant. Thank you.
Do that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. So I was saying that if the details of the deal are resonating what the headlines are about, then it is a great deal for both China and US. And Together, they are about 30-40% of the global economy. So it will lead to a lot of impetus in terms of trade. But I'm not entirely sure about what is the implications for the American businesses to be able to access the Chinese market, because what has typically happened is that access has come at a huge cost in terms of IPR being surrendered to the Chinese companies and the Chinese ecosystem in general. So if that continues, I'm not entirely sure whether the US companies will be keen to access that market, albeit it's an extremely large market. So the details would really matter in this deal. And I'm not really convinced that the Chinese will allow the Americans to come in and use their market. And we haven't had, we have had a series of instances in the past where the Chinese have agreed to something and they have not delivered on it, including the fact that they said they will lift off, I think, some $200-300 billion of goods from US that never did that. So it's, I think the next few years will unravel what will be the actual shape of this agreement once it gets implemented.
Dr. Bhattacharya, you just labelled that as a quote-unquote great deal, but would any of this have happened if it wasn't for Donald Trump's imposed tariffs and then the ongoing trade war afterwards? Does anyone really come out better than for this deal prior to Trump's tariffs were imposed?
Again, if the headlines are reflective of what the deal is, then this is clearly good for US, and this clearly would not have happened unless the US President Trump would have stirred the pot by putting the phenomenally high tariffs that he did earlier in February and then in April. So it clearly, if the deal is good for US, then the credit definitely goes to President Trump for architecting that deal. Absolutely, yes, no doubts about it.
And just a quick final question, Dr. Bhattacharya. Which sectors, you have tech, you have agriculture, manufacturing, obviously, with China, which sectors stand to gain the most from this tariff rollback?
High tech. Look, the planes were anyways being sold in US, in China. The US planes were being sold in China. So if you look at overall the profile of China of US goods that are being sold and the US manufactured goods that are being sold in China, that has changed over the years. So the competitive edge that the US had over a period of time has changed, and therefore they will find it very difficult actually to penetrate the market in China unless it is about primary goods, which is agricultural goods, which is about food items and so on and so forth, which is where US will stand a chance. But if it comes to the regular manufactured goods, which if I look at a bell curve, the middle part of it and the lower part of it will continue to be dominated by China. And therefore, after this deal is in place, there will be more Chinese goods entering US than the other way around. I'm not sure whether the deal also includes services. And therefore, since the details of the deals are not clear, so we're not really sure whether it's helping US or not. But again, on the face of it, it looks good as long as US is able to actually access the Chinese market.
Dr. J.J. Bhattacharya, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now move over to Europe, where Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged US counterpart Donald Trump to help secure a meeting with Vladimir Putin in Turkey on Thursday, while accusing the Russian leader of not seriously wanting to end the war. The Kremlin has refused to say whether Putin will travel to Turkey or not, after he himself proposed Russia-Ukraine talks in a weekend Kremlin address. On the other hand, as US President Donald Trump kicks off his Middle East trip, he said in Riyadh that US Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be in the US delegation at the peace talks in Istanbul, which could yield pretty good results, he said. Here's what Donald Trump said.
Talks are being held in Turkey later this week, probably on Thursday, and they could produce some pretty good results. Our people are going to be going there. Marco's going to be going there. Others are going to be going, and we'll see if we can get it done.
Zelensky has said in Kiev that the West should impose massive sanctions if Putin skips the meeting, emphasizing that he would do everything possible to make it happen and secure a ceasefire. Here's what he said.
очікувати тільки, як мінімум, сильного пакету від Сполучених Штатів Америки санкцій проти Росії. І це вже санкції, подивіться, не за агресію, не за окупацію тощо. Тобто компромісів вже і так мільйон. Санкції за те, що вони не хочуть, навіть припинення вогню. Це повинен бути найсильніший пакет санкцій. Бо це є воля до закінчення війни. Або ні. Тобто це чіткий сигнал, що вони не хочуть і не збираються закінчувати війну. Або навпаки, вони продемонструють, що вони не тільки з ядерною зброєю серйозні, але
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has warned that France doesn't want to unleash a World War III over Russia-Ukraine and stated that Ukraine acknowledges it cannot retake all of the Ukrainian territory seized by Russia since 2014. He also stressed that no legal framework existed to seize frozen Russian assets, and it was not a good solution. Moreover, he promised to impose new sanctions on Russia if it rejects the ceasefire and suggested that France is open to stationing its nuclear weapons in other European countries as a deterrent against Moscow. Let's now move over to the Middle East, where Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 29 people around the European hospital in Khan Yunis, according to Gaza's Civil Defense Agency. Spokesman Mahmoud Basal confirmed that rescue crews recovered the bodies from the area. Israel's military has urged residents in multiple northern Gaza locations to evacuate immediately ahead of a planned attack. Military spokesman Ariche Arvadi warned on social media that the IDF would strike any location used to launch rockets and urged civilians to seek shelter in Gaza City. French President Emmanuel Macron has slammed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for blocking aid to Palestinians in Gaza. Speaking to TF1, Macron called Netanyahu's actions unacceptable and shameful, highlighting the lack of water, medicine and access for wounded civilians and medical staff. UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Tom Fletcher has demanded that Israel lift its aid blockade on Gaza. Fletcher said Israel's offensive has killed tens of thousands and devastated the enclave. Let's take a listen in to what he said.
Israel is deliberately and unashamedly imposing inhumane conditions on civilians in the occupied Palestinian territory. For more than 10 weeks, nothing has entered Gaza. No food, medicine, water, or tent.
The armed wing of Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility for rocket attacks on southern Israel, targeting Ashdod, Ashkelon, Serdot, and other areas near the Gaza border. This comes after the Israeli military reported intercepting 2 projectiles, with a third landing in an open area. Israel's military confirmed that it intercepted 2 projectiles from Gaza, while a third fell without causing any damage. The incident prompted sirens in communities near the Gaza Strip, but no injuries were reported. Hostage families and former hostages freed in earlier deals marched in Tel Aviv, calling for an agreement to free all remaining hostages in Gaza and to end the war. Among the participants was Abdel Yayud, who was released in the most recent agreement after 482 days in captivity. Demonstrators urged the Trump administration to pressure Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to secure a ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister also announced on May the 12th that the military will enter Gaza with full force in the coming days. The United Kingdom's ambassador to the UN, Barbara Woodward, has issued a warning to Israel. Let's take a listen to it.
Israel has now fully blocked aid entering Gaza for over 2 months. Blocking aid as a pressure lever is unacceptable. And last week, the Israeli Security Cabinet approved plans to expand its military operations in Gaza. We strongly oppose both these actions, which will add to Palestinian suffering while doing nothing to serve the long-term interests of peace and security in the region.
Let's move on once again. New Delhi has rejected claims made by US President Donald Trump that trade deals helped broker a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. In a strong statement, India's foreign ministry said there was no discussion on trade during the standoff. Trump, speaking at a US-Saudi investment forum, said he used trade to push both sides towards peace, suggesting that without de-escalation, they'd lose access to US markets. Let's listen in.
Is to be a peacemaker and to be a unifier. I don't like war. Just days ago, my administration successfully brokered a historic ceasefire to stop the escalating violence between India and Pakistan. And I used trade to a large extent to do it. I said, fellas, come on, let's make a deal. Let's do some trading. Let's not trade nuclear missiles. Let's trade. We both have very powerful leaders, very strong leaders, good leaders, smart leaders. And it all stopped. Hopefully it'll remain that way, but it all stopped. I was actually getting along. Maybe we can even get them together a little bit, Marco, where they go out and have a nice dinner together. Wouldn't that be nice? But we've come a long way, and it could be, millions of people could have died from that conflict that started off small and was getting bigger and bigger and bigger by the day.
However, India says the real reason Pakistan stopped firing was its own military strikes on key Pakistani Air Force bases. The ceasefire was coordinated through a direct call between the two militaries on May the 10th. The Foreign Ministry also clarified that international communications were consistent with its public stance, that India was targeting terror infrastructure in response to a deadly attack in Kashmir. India's High Commissioner to Australia added that de-escalation remains a priority, but defending its citizens is non-negotiable. Let's listen in.
Had a ceasefire for a few days. It was initially looking very shaky.
Unfortunately, Pakistan violated it in the first few hours. But I think in the last few hours it has held. And we hope that this will continue.
Back to the Middle East once again, where Israel's military intercepted a missile launched from Yemen yesterday, with air raid sirens and explosions reported near Jerusalem. The missile was claimed by Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels, who say they targeted an Israeli airport in solidarity with Palestinians amid the ongoing Gaza war. The Houthis have repeatedly attacked Israel and Red Sea shipping since the conflict began in October of 2023. Earlier this month, they struck near Israel's Ben Gurion airport, injuring several and damaging infrastructure. Israel retaliated with its own strikes on Sana'a airport and power stations in Houthi-controlled Yemen. Another missile was also intercepted and claimed by the Houthis. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant vowed a forceful response. Meanwhile, the US reached a ceasefire deal with the Houthis last week, halting its own airstrikes after weeks of military action aimed at securing Red Sea maritime routes. Listen in to what the Houthi military spokesperson Yahya Sari said.
نفذت القوة الصاروخية في القوات المسلحة اليمنية عملية عسكرية استهدفت مطار اللد المسمى إسرائيليا مطار بن غوريون في منطقة يافا المحتلة، وذلك بصاروخ باليستي فرط صوتي، وقد حقق الصاروخ هدفه بنجاح بفضل الله، وتسبب في هروب ملايين الصهاينة المحتلين إلى الملاجئ وتوقف حركة المطار لقرابة الساعة. تأتي هذه العملية تأكيدا على استمرار حظر الملاحة في المطار المذكور، وعلى بقية الشركات التي لم تعلن وقف رحلاتها أن تحذو حذو الشركات التي سبق وأن أعلنت وقف رحلاتها إلى مطارات فلسطين المحتلة.
In a major policy shift, US President Donald Trump announced yesterday that he would lift all US sanctions on Syria at the request of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, ahead of a meeting with Syria's Islamist President Ahmed al-Shara in Saudi Arabia. Shara is set to meet Trump today. Trump cited support from Saudi Arabia and Turkey, saying the move offers Syria a chance at greatness. The decision, aimed at boosting humanitarian aid, trade and investment. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio will meet his Syrian counterpart this week. Syrian and Lebanese leaders welcome the move as a turning point. Members of both US parties cautiously supported the decision. The UN also praised the move, seeing it as a step towards Syria's recovery. Sanctions had previously isolated Syria financially and also politically, placing it among the most heavily restricted nations globally. Let's take a listen in to what the US president said on the matter.
I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness. Likewise, in Syria, which has seen so much misery and death, there is a new government that will hopefully succeed in stabilizing the country and keeping peace. That's what we want to see in Syria. And I'm very pleased to announce that Secretary Marco Rubio will be meeting with the new Syrian foreign minister in Turkey.
We're now joined by Shruti Das Gupta, who is a geopolitical expert located here in New Delhi. Thank you very much, Shruti, for joining us on the program. This move seems very sudden. Obviously, there has been sanctions on Syria for years since the regime of Bashar al-Assad has fallen. Situations have changed in recent times, but how much will this mean to the population, to the economy, to the political stability of Syria?
The economy, of course, with Saudi Arabia backing it, is going to bloom, as well as the US. So you can see a little bit of progress for the nation and the people itself. But you have to understand that the regime that is now going to control is Al-Qaeda right up till January. So the interim leader, who's Shara, who was part of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And it is a sanctioned UN and US terror organization, which was dissolved in January this year. So it is not a favorable regime. And up till a few weeks ago, we knew that the Syrian regime under Jolani and his goons were the HTS. They were taking down a genocide of the people, the Druze people specifically. So there was a particular genocide happening there as well. So you can look at it as a good thing that there is going to be a lifting of sanction, but is there going to be peace in that region? I'm highly skeptical, because the political regime that is now in control, in my opinion, would be a pro-US lobby. They have managed to dislodge Russia's strong arm in the Middle East, and they're very happy about it. And al-Shara, in fact, spent 5 years in an Iraqi jail. So you understand that the kind of man now going to be leading Syria into whatever is going to happen under the Saudi and the US overview is going to be very much optics-based. It'll look good, but it will not really be good for every section of the society. Slowly and slowly, you will see Syria spiral down into the very same kind of genocidal, anti-secular kind of mindset, and you will hear really, really bad news coming in from there as well. Because you can take a man out of Al-Qaeda, but you can't take Al-Qaeda out of the man, okay? So that ideology is going to stay exactly like that.
Shruti, we know that Trump is a deal maker. We know that if something else wasn't on the table from these Arab nations which have backed Trump doing this, he wouldn't have done it in the first place, especially with an old extreme Al-Qaeda extremist. What does Trump stand to benefit from lifting these sanctions on Syria and pleasing leaders like Mohammed bin Salman from these Gulf nations?
To understand what Trump benefits, Trump is looking for markets. With sanctions on Syria and other places, you'll find your sanctions being lifted en masse in a lot of places. And enforced trade is his weapon of choice. He's going to use sanctions, tariffs to kind of control the narrative, and the flow of money is how he's going to guide the world forward. from the US perspective. So he is looking for markets, he is looking to buy things, and he's also looking to stabilize, to present himself as a peacemaker. I believe you did cover in the news earlier that he's been taking claim for brokering the trade, which has been completely rejected by the Indian regime at my side. So he's looking to present himself as the best thing for the US economy. And that is what he's going to look for. He's looking for markets, he's looking for raw materials, and he's looking to look good in the optics overall. But that's all he's going to gain. It's not going to last very long. It doesn't last very long. We've seen it with the US backing the Taliban in the Afghanistan region, and that didn't end well, did it? So it's going to continue. No matter what you do, it is going to look good for a while. You're going to have a breathing space. You're going to think, oh my God, it is getting better. But Qatar has a hand in it, and Saudis, they want peace in the region. They want the Middle East to rise because they want to be the voice of the Middle East. And so they have their vested interest, and Trump is just basically looking to look good for his people, for his country, as the best peace deal maker now. That is what is his aim. So this is what he is trying to get out of it.
Yes, Shruti Das Gupta, thank you very much for your insight on this matter. And we now move on. Saudi Arabia has rolled out a lavish welcome for US President Donald Trump on his first state visit of his second term. The kingdom has announced massive investments totaling $600 billion, ranging from defense to artificial intelligence. Under glittering chandeliers, Trump praised Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, even joking that the deal should be worth $1 trillion. The White House says Saudi Arabia will buy nearly $142 billion worth in US weapons, calling it the largest ever defense deal. Meanwhile, Saudi tech firm's Data Vault is set to invest $20 billion into US AI infrastructure. Companies like Google will also boost tech ties between the two nations. Let's listen in to what the two leaders had to say.
قد انعكست مساندة علاقات اقتصادية بين بلدينا على أنه تبادل تجاري يتبلغ $500 مليار خلال عام 2014 إلى 2024. واليوم نأمل على فرص شراكة بحجم $600 مليار من بين اتفاقيات تزيد عن $300 مليار تم إعلانها خلال هذا المنتدى.
It will be a special day in the Middle East with the whole world watching when Saudi Arabia joins us, and you'll be greatly honoring me, and you'll be greatly honoring all of those people that have fought so hard for the Middle East. And I really think it's going to be something special, but you'll do it in your own time, and that's what I want, and that's what you.
In a surprise move, Trump says he's accepting a $400 million Boeing jet 7478 from Qatar, intended as a temporary Air Force One. Several Republican lawmakers are raising security concerns. Trump is expected to visit Qatar and the UAE next, continuing his tour across the Gulf. US President Donald Trump on Tuesday called Iran the most destructive force in the Middle East, blaming Tehran for instability across the region and warning that the United States will never allow it to obtain a nuclear weapon. Offering what he described as both a final warning and a potential opening for diplomacy, Trump said Iran has a choice between continuing its chaos and terror or embracing a path towards peace. Trump said he was willing to strike a new deal with the Islamic Republic, but only if its leaders changed course. He also said that if Iran's leadership rejects this olive branch, he will have to inflict massive maximum pressure. Speaking at an investment summit in the Saudi capital, Riyadh, Trump warned that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon and said this offer for a deal won't last forever. Trump also drew a stark contrast between what he called the constructive version of Saudi Arabia and the collapse and suffering he had said that being caused by Iranian leaders. Listen in to what the US president said.
I want to make a deal with Iran. If I can make a deal with Iran, I'll be very happy if we're going to make your region and the world a safer place. But if Iran's leadership rejects this olive branch and continues to attack their neighbors, then we will have no choice but to inflict massive maximum pressure, drive Iranian oil exports to zero, like I did before.
Let's now move over to North America, where Canada has a new government and a new mission. Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled his cabinet on Tuesday, promising to redefine ties with the United States amid escalating tensions over President Donald Trump's trade war. 2 weeks after his stunning election comeback, Carney's team was sworn in at a ceremony in Ottawa. The 60-year-old former central banker is now officially serving his first full term in office. His message was a stronger, more independent Canada. The new cabinet includes key negotiators who've been dealing with Washington on tariffs that have cost jobs. Dominic LeBlanc takes over Canada US trade. Anita Anand replaces Melaine Joly as foreign minister. Ivan Solomon, a former journalist, joins as the first ever AI minister, signalling Carney's push for economic transformation. Carney says his government will work restlessly to protect Canada's sovereignty, a direct response to Trump's recent annexation threats. Let's listen in.
My government will work relentlessly to keep Canada secure as a sovereign nation and to keep Canadians safe in their communities. We will build a stronger Canadian Armed Forces to defend every inch of our territory through unprecedented investments in land, air, sea, and cyberspace.
Staying in North America, a Senate report released yesterday announces President Trump administration of slashing cancer research funding by 31% in early 2025, cutting $13.5 billion in health funding and terminating 1,660 grants. The National Cancer Institute lost over $300 million, and the National Institutes of Health saw a $2.7 billion reduction, driving grant funding to decade-low levels. Senator Bernie Sanders, who commissioned the report, condemned the cuts as an unprecedented attack on science. Health Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. denied the allegations, claiming the department is streamlining and upholding gold standard science. The report, based on interviews with scientists, revealed widespread disruptions, including lab shutdowns, clinical trial delays, and the deletion of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention of Health data sets. With over 40 grants on vaccine hesitancy were also cancelled amid a deadly measles outbreak. Controversially, Kennedy hired David Greer, a discredited vaccine conspiracy theorist, to investigate vaccines and autism. Meanwhile, Trump proposes a further 26% Health and Human Services budget cut, while allocating $500 million to Kennedy's wellness campaign, Make America Healthy Again. The Trump administration has cut $450 million in federal funding to Harvard University, escalating its battle with the school over campus policies and protest responses. The move follows Harvard's rejection of the Trump administration's claims that it violated federal law. The university responded by expanding its lawsuit, which challenges a broader $2.2 billion research funding freeze. Federal agencies allege Harvard failed to address anti-Semitism on campus, citing student complaints and a 300-page internal report. The Education Department, now led by Linda McMahon, also threatened to revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status and foreign student enrollment rights. Critics say the administration is weaponizing anti-Semitism to target elite institutions, while Harvard asserts the cuts are unlawful and undermine academic freedom. The National Institutes of Health, the Energy Department, and the National Science Foundation have also begun terminating grants. Harvard's lawsuit continues as university leaders balance legal action with internal reforms aimed at addressing federal concerns. We move on once again. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said yesterday he is likely to meet Pope Leo XIV, depending on the outcome of peace talks with Russia later this week. The meeting would follow the Pope's inaugural Mass in St. Peter's Square, which several foreign leaders are expected to attend. Zelensky spoke in an interview with foreign media outlets ahead of tomorrow's talks in Istanbul between Ukrainian and Russian representatives. He is also scheduled to meet Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara. Russia has not confirmed if President Vladimir Putin will attend. However, Zelensky held his first conversation with the Pope Leo on the 12th of May and invited him to visit Ukraine. The Pope has called for a genuine, just and lasting peace in the region. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.